Hello, hackers and gentle hackers. Welcome. Hello, come in. How are you? Take a seat. Don't sit there. We're putting the coats there. Don't worry. Anywhere else is good. Anywhere else is good. Hello, welcome. It is, I don't even know what we're calling this. This is not Tradecraft. It's Tradecraft any day. All right. It's not Tradecraft Tuesday because it's not Tuesday. But it is Tradecraft any day, a Tradecraft tidbit, if you will. My name is Matt Kiely. Welcome. I'm one of the principal security researchers at Huntress. And today we've got a little tidbit of Tradecraft for you, just a little hors d'oeuvre sized little thing that we found in the wild that we wanted to kind of spread the word about because we found it to be very interesting. But first, I just want to check in with the chat here and see how everybody is doing. If you've got any questions along the way, just hit me up. This is very informal. We're kind of doing this live, as they say. So there's not going to be a ton of structure to this one, but we're glad that you're here. We're glad that you made it as well. So yeah, if you want to put in the chat where you're coming in from, I am in the Syracuse branch of the Huntress office, also known as my apartment, and it is a screaming 84 degrees here today in Syracuse and sunny. Yes, the sun does come out in Syracuse from time to time. So with that having been said, let's go ahead and jump right in to a Tradecraft tidbit called Smuggler's Gambit, uncovering HTML smuggling adversary in the middle. Tradecraft. Again, my name is Matt. So why are we here? Well, we posted a blog, I think like 2 weeks ago, right? From some of the findings from one of our advanced, very highly experimental sources of telemetry that's not even ready for prime time yet, but we're running some tests on it. And we found some interesting findings related to Tradecraft that we observed in the wild. And we want to share that with you because we like to educate the community. And how better to educate the community than to tell people how hackers are hacking them so we can punch those hackers in the teeth. So if you're interested, all of the long form content for what I'm about to show you in this presentation is in the blog post, which is at huntress.com. If you go to the blog section, this one's called Smuggler's Gambit, and it has all of the indicators of compromise, TTPs, all of that good stuff as well. So where do we start with this one? Well, as I alluded to, we've got kind of a very experimental new feature for the Microsoft 365 product that we've rolled out. And I've given you these heavily redacted screenshots because we're not exactly totally ready to broadcast like what this thing is doing. It's highly experimental. It's highly top secret, but I can share with you just a little taste of what we've got going on here. And we received 3 separate notifications all within like 2 minutes of each other. And the important thing to draw attention to is the URLs in each of these notifications. And I want to say that this was 2 weeks ago between 1:37 p.m. and 1:39 p.m. So within the span of 2 minutes. And right off the bat, we were like, does anybody notice anything kind of weird about these URLs? If you were to break down the URL pattern and look at how they're composed, you see https://rnsnno.something.pro. And there are 3 of those that have the same subdomain, the same top level domain, but different domains, right? So that was kind of weird. So we started to look into this and we start peeling back the onion. And the more we peel back, the more we cry, of course, because we realized that these are domains that have been registered. Now it's May 21st or maybe May 22nd somewhere. The blog has the actual info. But these domains were registered on May 20th. So the day before or 2 days before we identified them through Namecheap. And as a former red teamer, this kind of, piqued my interest because I used to do a lot, maybe even all of my domain name registration for red team engagements, the authorized, legal, of course, red team engagements that I was contracted to do. I used to do all of the domain registry under Namecheap. So Namecheap is, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, a hotbed for shady, illicit activity domain name registration. So I start poking around at this thing, and I start, just seeing what is actually at these URLs, right? Because there's got to be, if there's some kind of notification that we've got some URLs to look at, and they're all have this interesting structure to them, but they all are registered within the last day. I mean, something's probably going on, right? So I start poking and prodding at this thing and seeing if I can like coerce it to show me like what it's actually doing. And I get a 200 OK from curling the page, just the web root here. But what's interesting is that there is an href.li redirect here that goes to example.com. If you're not familiar with example.com, punch it into your browser right now. It's totally benign. It's totally safe. It's just a little block of text that says, this is an example. And it's meant to, if you need to test some kind of web, retrieve URL capability or something like that, you can use that to test it. Now, at this point, I kind of open the floor to the rest of the Huntress research team. And I'm like, all right, so we've got clearly something's going on, but we've got to unravel this before we can kind of really understand it. And so I turn over to the leader of the Security Operations Center, Max Rogers, who is really, really good with the threat intel side of things. And he returns to me with something that looks like this. And so we punch in the domain into VirusTotal, and we use that wonderful branching graph function of VirusTotal, which I'm going to show here in a moment, to find all of the associated entities with this domain. And among these associated entities are what is down at, my head is covering a little bit of it, but you can see that the communicating files calls out to this domain, and it is called redacted because it's PII, and I didn't want to actually include that in there, but remittance 05212024.html. So again, we're getting somewhere. This is kind of interesting, right? So this is the graph view of VirusTotal for a different domain, but I just wanted to show that from the kind of threat intel side of the house, like this is a fantastic tool, right? So this wasn't the domain in question. I'm just showing an example of like what you can do with this VirusTotal relations dashboard. So give it a try if you have access to it. Anyway, so with this file in hand, now VirusTotal Enterprise allows you to download files if you have the if you've found them via the relations tab or the file hash or something like that. You can actually download them if they have been uploaded to VirusTotal. So I went ahead and did that. And when I opened this up, this HTML file had this inside of it. And so this is a garbled encoded mess that is, come to find out, dynamically reassembled when an HTML file is opened by a browser and loaded into the document object model of the browser. And so this was also one of those moments where I was like, it was that Leonardo DiCaprio meme where you point in the chair. I have seen this before. I have used this before, in fact. And what is this? This is called HTML smuggling. So this, however, is the encoded JavaScript that is dynamically rendered to the page when you open the file. But this is garbage, right? However, if you think about it, this has to be reassembled. And there's payload delivery in here somewhere, but we're not totally sure what it is yet. And when you double click on this file, you're going to open it in a browser probably, and it's going to be reassembled and something's going to happen to you, right? We're not totally sure what that is in this case yet. But as a point of reference, I have used this in red team engagements to serve a zip file to somebody to pass through their antivirus and email filtering undetected. And so that's how I've used it before. So I saw this and I was immediately like, HTML smuggling, we got it. So when you unravel this encoded gross block of injected base64 that gets decoded and then injected as JavaScript, this is kind of what you find, right? The first element gets built, and this is all built dynamically, so you have to actually double click and load this into the browser to see this. But this gets built dynamically. There is the injection of like an Outlook loading screen at first. There are a couple little extraneous functions that do some like byte array conversions. Not super interesting. We've kind of seen that stuff before. But then we get to this right here, and this is the part that sets a remote URL. And we can see again that we've got that RNSNNO.whatever.pro. And I've defanged this, but that's basically what the URL was. And then we've got a few other things, but then eventually we get to the meat of the actual injected JavaScript here that's rendered to the page, right? And so this will retrieve content from that specified, this highlighted red box right here, the URL that's specified there. and it will append whatever it finds there into the document body as an iframe, right? Or as an element, right? So it takes that, it sets it up as an iframe, and it injects it right into the document. Okay, so at the end of the day, that's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but what does this actually mean? Well, when you open this file, this HTML smuggling file, the payload in this case is rendered from the file itself. So you're not going to any remote site directly in your URL bar to do this. Whoops. You're not going anywhere directly. You're just opening up a file local to your file system. And this is what you see. And again, I've redacted some of the identifiable information here because this was a targeted payload at a particular company, right? And so what we see here is the prompt to log in to either Microsoft Office or Outlook or something like that. And this was when I was like, okay, this is pretty cool, because after a little bit more testing, we see the iframe. That's how it's pretty much constructed here. So we see the iframe in use there. And through a little bit of coercion, I got the remote endpoint that it's requesting to load in an arbitrary username at lowpriv@huskyworks.onmicrosoft.com. Now I'm live on the actual endpoint here. I've actually gone to rnsnno.sysb.pro and then added into this QRC parameter. I injected my own testbed user, and that rendered the login page for my testbed user. And then I was like, it is now exactly clear what this is doing. And so this is HTML smuggling plus adversary in the middle tradecraft. Why do I invoke the adversary in the middle part here? Because HTML smuggling, easy to tell because of the payload construction. But adversary in the middle, why? Because this is not a site clone. If that had been a site clone, if this one that we saw here had just like, let's say like a user at acmecorp.com on Microsoft.com or something like that. If I had tried to inject my own user into this URL right here, that would not have worked, right? So it's not a site clone in this case. It is a transparent proxy. We've seen this before with things like Evil Jinx and Evil Proxy and Modlishka. This is the exact same kind of, you just proxy the legitimate Microsoft traffic right on through to the actual endpoint, and you just sit in the middle, adversary in the middle, tradecraft, right? Now, I had used, in fact, let's do like a little demonstration here. So I've used HTML smuggling before. So let me show you like what that actually looks like. So I have a little tool that I wrote, and I kept it closed source, so it's not available out into the open here, but it's called Isohedron. And like I want to say like 2 years ago, the HTML smuggling to ISO to LNK to DLL, that whole payload chain that was supposed to kind of be better at evading mark of the web and evading EDR and antivirus and that kind of stuff. That was all the rage. So I wrote like a little script to actually to emulate that, right? So I can build an HTML payload, an HTML smuggling payload, like on the fly for this one. And this one's just going to be like a bare bones example of this. So if I go into Isohedron, which is right there, yep. And we go into the built payload here at payload. I've got evil.html right here, right? That's a little hard to see, but I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code and show you exactly what's going on here. And it's going to make sense here in a moment. So in this HTML file, and remember, under the pretext, I would like email this to somebody or put it in a zip file and say, oh, this is like a some kind of like tax document that you need to open up and sign or whatever. I would email this to them, and this is what's in the body of the code, essentially. All it really boils down to is a script function that takes this big gross block of base 64, and it will, so effectively, whatever follow-on payload you want can be stored in this way, and then it will serve it to the user, right? So what actually happens is that when you open this up as the user, so you're like opening evil.html, right? And then if you saw it right there is a zip file that gets served to you, right? And so we can then follow the rest of the attack chain here. And this is just you open an ISO and then you open an LNK file, which loads a DLL. That part's not interesting. The interesting part here is that through this HTML file, I have dynamically served, I'll do it again so you can see, I've dynamically served something to the user, and we've stayed completely in the browser here. So again, in other words, this big gross block of base 64 is the actual payload. It just gets transferred, it gets decoded and transferred over to the target user. So that's part one. That's your HTML smuggling part. But what about the other part, right? If you combine that with something like, and we'll go ahead and open it up, and I want to say that I went to, or let me get my lure for this one. Lures, get URL 0. So if I open up this link right here, here's part 2, right? And this is using Evil Jinx, the transparent proxy that we all know and love, right? But notice that I am live on the endpoint, the actual like server here. I've gone to, and it's not secure, and it's, you know, whatever. There are other telltale signs that some kind of evil is happening, but I'm going to the server to actually do this. But this is the transparent proxy part, right? So we've got these two combine pieces of tradecraft that we fuse into something that I personally had never seen before and never thought to put together. So that was super cool. So if we return to the presentation here, let me actually show you the video now of what that looked like when we actually opened up. And this is not the actual payload that we use, but this is an additional payload that we found on Joe's sandbox as a result of doing some of this extra research. So when the user opens this HTML file, they see this little like Outlook. It's a little laggy, and I apologize for that, but we see this little like Outlook opening loading screen, right? And then if we wait and we wait and we wait, we're then going to get to, wait a little bit longer, we get to the Outlook login page right here, right? And so this is, again, an injected, this is an iframe of the login page that they've retrieved from the actual like evil infrastructure, those, you know, .sysb, .pro URLs, right? So at this point, our hypothesis is that if you were to put your username and password into whatever you see in that iframe, you're owned. And not only that, if you were to then put your MFA code in as well, same deal with Evil Jinx, same deal with all the other kind of transparent proxy tradecraft that you've ever seen, you're compromised, right? So that was interesting. To round up this little presentation for this little tradecraft tidbit here, unfortunately, well, I will say fortunately, and you'll see why in a moment, but fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I can't show you the actual one. There's actually two reasons. One is that it's a targeted phish at somebody, and I don't think there's any reason to broadcast that particular company's name and the particular identity that was targeted by that. I think that's just irresponsible if we did that. So we wanted to go ahead and not show that. But the second reason, the more important reason, is that I went back to research, to reopen this payload that I found, and I got this: connection failed. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, what are we going to do about that? And the reason I got connection failed is, again, something that I can show you in the live demo here. And so this is the actual payload that we found, right? And I'll go ahead and open this up with Google Chrome. And again, we've got our injected, our iframe here with connection failed. And if we go into inspect, and we go over to the console, I think will get us exactly what we want here. Get to rnsnno.vscar.pro with all of the little URL parameters. Net error failed. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what does that mean? So I opened this up, and this is what I found. If you're seeing this message, it means your application is not running. If you're a developer who is developing, please check the full logs to fix the application. If not, please, capital P, contact capital C, technical support, capital to fix this. Below are a few lines of error help you understand, ? Powered by naked pages. Okay. Outstanding. So, and then there's like some error that there's some relay not found. So I'm like, okay, this is like juicy. I don't know what I'm dealing with here, but this is like super cool. So, come to find out that I now have to wait basically for another payload before I can continue the research on this. But while I was waiting for that, we'll get to the mitigation here in a moment. While I was waiting for that, I got an email after posting the blog about all of these findings from a good friend who, again, did not explicitly say that I could use their name. So I just went ahead and kept their name out of this. But you know who you are if you're watching this, and I really appreciate it because this is fantastic information. So thanks for writing about it. I'm a big fan, et cetera, et cetera. The phishing kit used in this campaign is Naked Pages, a phishing as a service kit. We at Huntress had hypothesized that this was a phishing as a service framework, but we were more interested in just getting the word out about this kind of technique rather than running down the exact type of infrastructure and type of tool that was being used. So then this person goes on to give us more intel about like the URL construction and some of the other things that you could see if you went looking and poking at this infrastructure. And then gave us another link to an additional sample that was analyzed on Joe's sandbox. And our hypothesis was that we had never seen this before in the SMB, right? So like this was totally new as a result of kind of improved telemetry, a research project that we've been kind of standing up over the last few months. And I was like, well, is this new Tradecraft entirely? And the answer to that apparently is no. I mean, HTML smuggling is absolutely not new. That was the hotness in like 2021 or 22, I forget. But this kind of combination of adversary in the middle and HTML smuggling was used as recently as November of 2023, as we can see in this Joe Sandbox link right here. So this is not exactly new, right? But it's new to Huntress and it's new to the SMB. And so we thought that even though this isn't like a crazy earth-shattering finding or anything like that, little tidbit, little interesting piece of tradecraft to watch out for. And here is just the example of that payload that was run on Joe Sandbox in November of 2023. Before that's it, I think I have one last thing to show because somebody brought up the question of, okay, well, mitigations, right? So it's important to kind of understand the detection capabilities. It's important to understand the tradecraft and how the payload actually is delivered. But like at the end of the day, what's like a good mitigation for this? And I think I have like one that I can provide to you. So if you go in, so HTML smuggling is all about this .html file, right? And so this, when you double click on this, is opened by a browser, and then the content of whatever JavaScript or whatever craziness encoded, gross, reassembled payload stuff that's going on inside, that's all rendered in the document object model. So if you double click on this, this gets loaded into Chrome. So what's a good way that we can mitigate that? Well, if you go into your, what is it, default apps maybe? And there is a, I don't remember it right now, but there is a registry setting that does this too. So you can do this programmatically, which is super interesting and super easy if you want to script this out. Choose default apps by file type. And then this is going to load for a second. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, your dry cleaner administrative assistant probably doesn't need to be opening .html files, right? Same reason that your dry cleaner administrative assistant probably doesn't need to be running PowerShell.exe or anything like that. So what we want to do is we want to go find where that .html default application is specified, which is like down here somewhere. There it is. And we've got two, and there's a ton that you could do this with HTAs. You could do this with HTML and .htm files. So yeah, actually HTA, while I'm in here, I'll probably change that as well. But like good system hardening takes account of the default application that's used to open any of these programs. So let's just change it. Like what's stopping us from just setting this as Notepad, right? So now, drum roll please, now we've got our same payload, but in this case, when we open this up, it just opens it up with Notepad, right? .js files, another really good one, because Windows, when you open a .js file, will assume that it is JScript, not JavaScript, JScript, which can allow, just like HTAs can allow injection and code execution on the operating system outside of the browser. So good job with that one with Windows. Really appreciate that one. But same thing goes for things like HTAs, right? You can choose this. You can look for a new one and just use, Notepad or Notepad++ or something like that. But yeah, at the end of the day, a really good mitigation for this one to prevent HTML smuggling is to just change the type of change the program that is invoked when you double click on this, because otherwise your unsuspecting user is going to double click on this and load something into the browser. And whether it is some DLL that gets executed or like a Cobalt Strike beacon or what we've seen here with the HTML smuggling and adversary in the middle tradecraft, I mean, that's all part and parcel of if they can't run it in the browser, then the payload can't be delivered. So that is effectively what I have for you today. Again, a little Tradecraft tidbit. We're doing these kind of little like bite-sized short form little pieces of information to get kind of interesting stuff out to the community. So thanks for coming along with us. If we have any questions, I'd be happy to take them at this time. And I don't know if we have any questions, but you know what? Let me just put this back up on the screen just in case anybody does have any questions. My email is right there, matt.kiely@huntresslabs.com. And if you have any questions, please email me directly and I would be happy to answer them. All right. I think that's where we're going to call it then. So thank you for coming along. My name is Matt Kiely. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Be good to yourself. Be good to each other. Keep hacking, keep hunting, and see you down the road.